I'm Chloe Benson, 32 years old, living in Charleston, South Carolina. To outsiders, I had the perfect marriage to Ryan, a charming, warm man adored by my family. But it turned out everything was just an elaborate facade I had foolishly believed for the past 3 years. The trip to New Orleans with my 3 closest friends was a gift to myself after months of grinding at the law firm. We had planned it for half a year. Spa days, food tours, iconic jazz bars. But after just 2 days, everything fell apart. Emily had a seafood allergy reaction, and Lisa got pulled into an emergency at her office, leaving the group deflated. I decided to cut the trip short. All I could think about was Ryan's face lighting up when I showed up early with his favorite beignets and that bourbon he always talked about. I even smiled to myself as I parked in front of our house. I entered through the garage like always, hoping to surprise him, but I was the one who got surprised. From the second floor I heard Ryan's voice, low but crystal clear. "Marriage is just a shackle, Mark. If it weren't for Chloe's family money, I'd have been gone ages ago." I froze on the stairs. Blood rushed to my ears. My heart pounded so hard I could barely breathe. I waited for the laugh, thinking maybe he was joking. But there was only silence. Then Ryan laughed. A cold, bone-chilling laugh. Honestly, playing the perfect husband is easy, especially now that her dad's about to bring me into the executive board. Give it a few more years, and I won't have to pretend anymore. I gripped the banister so tight my knuckles turned white. The financial wife. That's how he called me. After 3 years of marriage, after countless candlelit dinners where he swore I was the woman he had always dreamed of. I don't know how I stayed calm, but I did. I quietly walked back down, grabbed the paper bag with beignets and the bottle of bourbon, and left the house without a word. I parked at the airport lot and sat there for hours, crying until my face was blotchy and swollen. An old woman tapped on my window, asking if I needed help. I forced a bitter smile, shook my head, and told my first lie of the day. My dog just died. When I returned home the next day, I entered through the front door, greeting Ryan with a gentle smile. He hugged me tight, kissed me like nothing had happened, as if the words he spewed 2 nights before were just a bad dream. But I knew, from that moment, I was living with a stranger. A man I'd have to pretend to love just a little longer, long enough to expose everything he was hiding. 5 days passed. 5 days sleeping beside a man who called me a walking ATM, still pretending to believe his cheap, sweet words. 5 days of watching, analyzing his every move, every gesture, seeing the cracks in the narrative Ryan had so carefully crafted. I couldn't sleep for 5 nights straight. Ryan kept holding me like he hadn't shattered my trust with a careless phone call, but I saw him with different eyes now, the eyes of a woman no longer blind. That Friday morning I made my move. I told him I had to stay late at the law firm, but instead I went to the bank. I checked our joint account and wasn't surprised to see suspicious transactions. Ryan had been withdrawing small amounts, $300 or $400, enough to fly under the radar, but in total nearly $25,000 over 6 months. I tracked the withdrawals. Most were made during the so-called investor meetings in Savannah. Strangely, there were no hotel bills, no restaurant charges, nothing legitimate. The money vanished into ATMs around Littleton, his old hometown. My gut told me to dig deeper. I remembered his old gym bag he always took to the gym. Inside, I found a burner phone. A cheap, untraceable phone from a convenience store. He set the password to his birthday. So predictable I almost laughed. But the laugh tasted bitter. Only one number was saved under the letter M. The texts cut through me like knives. "I miss you. Almost there. Just hang in a little longer. Be patient, Marissa. We'll have it all once I make it onto the board. Chloe has no clue." Marissa. A name I had never heard in 3 years of marriage, but she clearly wasn't a stranger to Ryan. And me? I was just a stepping stone to them. I took photos of everything, stored them on an external drive hidden in my office safe. I wouldn't leave a single crack for Ryan to exploit. From now on, I was playing his game, but by my rules. I secretly opened a personal bank account at a small local bank downtown, where Ryan had never set foot. I started transferring money from our joint account into it, bit by bit, never more than $500 at a time, steady as quiet waves wearing down the shore. I knew this might be bending the law, but I also knew Ryan had never played fair. On the outside, I stayed the doting wife, cooking dinners, asking about his day, but I left subtle clues. I forgot to pay the utility bill, letting him see the credit card was declined. I left staged emails open inquiring about divorce lawyers. I casually dropped hints that my father might be restructuring his private investments due to economic uncertainties. Ryan's reaction? Panic disguised under a polished mask. He started checking my phone, snooping through my emails, and out of nowhere suggested we take a vacation to Napa Valley to rekindle the spark. I smiled, nodded, fully aware he was testing the waters, trying to see if I had caught on. Day by day, he grew more unsettled. I noticed him trying harder with every little gesture, offering to drive me to work, brewing my morning coffee, even cleaning the balcony he had ignored for an entire year. But his eyes weren't the same. They carried the fear of someone losing control. I had everything I needed: proof of his withdrawals, the texts to Marissa, and most importantly, my confidence. I was going to let him believe everything was still under his control, just a little longer. I wanted Ryan to taste the same helplessness he had so casually inflicted, to feel the weight of the chessboard shifting right under his feet. And when the time was right, I'd make sure he couldn't get back up. I started changing. Nothing drastic, nothing too obvious, just small enough for Ryan to feel the unease creeping in. I stopped sending him sweet texts during work hours, stopped asking what he wanted for dinner. When I got home, I often claimed I was tired, locking myself in the office for hours, pretending to be on private calls he couldn't overhear. Whenever Ryan asked who I was speaking to, I would smile faintly and throw out something vague. An old client from Atlanta, a few projects needing review. Plausible enough not to raise red flags, but just ambiguous enough to keep him off balance. I left my laptop open, whether by accident or design is debatable, with searches about asset division in divorce and separate property protection laws in South Carolina. I knew Ryan wouldn't resist checking. And just as I predicted, he started acting. Ryan grew strangely cautious. He lurked while I slept, checked my phone when I was in the shower, even rummaged through my purse if I left it on the chair. One evening, I intentionally left a fake bank statement with a made-up balance from my private account on the kitchen counter. When I came back, the paper had vanished, leaving behind an empty space. I pretended not to notice. His behavior became increasingly blatant. He suggested we attend marriage counseling, something he had once laughed off when I brought it up last year. He sent flowers to my office every day, lavish bouquets with cards dripping with overly dramatic declarations of love. I just smiled thinly when my coworkers teased me about my romantic husband, feeling a bitter mix of contempt and pity rise inside me. The panic was making Ryan reckless. He started randomly checking my schedule, probing about any unusual meetings. Once, when I lied about meeting Loretta at a downtown cafe, he showed up unannounced. He claimed it was a surprise, but the frantic look in his eyes as he scanned the empty cafe where I sat alone said more than words ever could. He was drowning in the quicksand of his own making. The quieter I stayed, the more unhinged Ryan became. I suggested we sleep in separate rooms for a while, using the excuse of needing space to focus on a new project. He agreed. But those nights I caught him standing silently outside my door, ear pressed against it, desperate to catch any hint of what I might be plotting. One morning I missed his call while I was in a meeting. Within 1 hour he had called me 19 times. When I finally answered, Ryan was panting, his voice trembling with fear and desperation. "Are you okay? Did something happen with your family? You're avoiding me, aren't you? Chloe, you can't do this to me." I replied calmly, "What exactly are you so worried about, Ryan? I'm just busy with work." The silence that followed stretched long enough for me to hear the clock ticking on the desk. I noticed him starting to do things he had never done before. Reorganizing the bookshelves, replacing hallway light bulbs, washing the car under the blazing sun. Sudden acts of domesticity so over the top that I didn't need to say a word to know he was trying to prove his presence was still necessary. I didn't give him that chance. I left divorce lawyer brochures in the mail tray on my desk, knowing he would find them and spiral. I casually dropped lines and fake phone calls about my father's company considering changing its asset division policy, loud enough for Ryan to overhear when passing by. He was like a caged animal, getting clumsier by the day, trying to hide his fear. One night I caught him standing frozen in front of the walk-in closet, holding our dusty wedding album. He said he was reminiscing about the early days of our relationship. I just nodded, offering no reaction, letting him drown in the panic he had created for himself. I never thought I could be this calm, but when you live with a man who sees you as a walking bank account, you learn how to be strong without ever needing to appear tough. I wanted him to feel, inch by inch, the coldness seeping into the house that once felt warm to me. And Ryan, even if he didn't fully understand what was happening yet, was beginning to sense the ghost of the truth. The day he feared most was coming closer than he realized. Saturday night dinner went exactly as I planned. I prepared his favorite lasagna, opened the red wine he liked to show off to his friends, even placed fresh lavender on the table, the flower he once said reminded him of when we first fell in love. Everything was so perfect, he couldn't have suspected a thing. Until I flipped the script. We sat under the soft glow of the dining room light, Ryan rambling on about the real estate deal he wanted to pitch to my dad next week. I sat quietly, offering the occasional smile, letting him play the role of the successful husband he clung to for so long. When he raised his glass to toast me, I took my chance. Ryan, I tilted my head slightly, keeping my voice steady. Do you remember what you said during our 3-year anniversary dinner? That I was the best thing that ever happened to you? He smiled, that familiar gleam of confidence in his eyes. Of course I remember. Why do you ask? I swirled my wine, pausing just long enough to make him squirm. Because, I said, eyes locked on his face, I think you forgot what you told Mark in your office last week. About regretting our marriage. About how, if it weren't for my family's money, you would have left long ago. The wine glass in his hand froze midair. I watched his throat tense as he swallowed hard, but he tried to keep his cool. Chloe, you misheard. That was just venting to a friend. Everyone gets frustrated sometimes, says things they don't mean. You know that. Sometimes people say dumb things when they're overwhelmed. I chuckled softly, void of any warmth. Oh, and what about calling me the money wife? Was that part of the frustration too? Or the plan to climb onto the executive board so you'd have more options? Ryan slammed his glass down so hard the wine spilled onto the plate. He threw his hands up, looking like a man backed into a corner. Chloe, please. Let me explain. I've been under so much pressure. From work, from your family, from you. I felt trapped. But I never stopped loving you. I said those things when I was drunk. You have to believe me. I leaned back in my chair, watching the man I once thought was my safe harbor now flailing in his pathetic performance. Interesting, I murmured, because I remember you being completely sober, and sober enough to be texting Marissa. Or was she just another part of your crisis? Ryan turned pale. Now he had no excuses left. He stammered, then broke down in tears. The same tears that once melted my heart now only filled me with disgust. Chloe, you can't throw away everything we've built over one bad night, right? Have you thought about maybe having a baby? It could help us heal things. I laughed. This time the sound was as sharp as a blade. Ryan, I leaned in close, speaking slowly. If you think a baby is going to chain me down, you're just digging your hole even deeper. I stood up, not rushed, not angry. Everything I needed was already in my hands. I looked at him one last time, catching that desperate, broken look in his eyes, and I knew I was in control now. Dinner ended without anyone touching dessert. Ryan sat motionless at the table, clutching his hair in frustration, while I walked upstairs, locked the door, and smiled for the first time in months. Not because I felt victorious, but because I knew the game was over the moment he realized I had heard everything. I didn't give Ryan another chance to act. The next morning I left the house early, leaving him behind with the messy kitchen and the suffocating air of defeat. I went straight to the office of my private attorney, a woman Loretta had introduced me to, someone far removed from my family's social circle. Margaret Fields, a specialist in marriage and asset law, welcomed me into her small but discreet office in West Charleston. She didn't need much explanation. The evidence I brought was enough for anyone to see exactly the kind of man Ryan was. I've seen plenty of complicated divorces, Chloe. she said calmly. But I have to say, your husband isn't just unfaithful, he's stupid. What he left behind, the bank transactions, the burner phone, the texts with Marissa, they're a gift to us. I nodded, needing no more comfort. I no longer needed pity from anyone. Within 1 week, I worked closely with Margaret and my family's financial team. Every joint account, every trust I had once foolishly allowed Ryan to access was immediately frozen. He had no clue. I let him believe everything was fine, letting him play the perfect husband for a few more days. I met privately with my parents on Sunday evening in our family office. It wasn't easy to bring up. My father had always seen Ryan as the son he never had, and my mother once called him the golden son-in-law. But this time I kept my emotions out of it. Once I laid out the evidence, the room fell into a heavy silence. My father, the man who believed he could see through anyone with a single look, said nothing. My mother cried, but she didn't hug me like she usually would. She just whispered quietly, "My daughter doesn't deserve this." I persuaded them to stay silent until everything was settled. My father reluctantly agreed. He had lost his faith in Ryan, but it seemed his disappointment in himself cut even deeper than the betrayal itself. 3 days later, Margaret filed the divorce papers, complete with all the evidence, in court. Ryan was served while sitting in a meeting, pretending to discuss investment strategies with one of my colleagues. The look he gave me, I'll never forget. Shock, panic, then fury. But I only smiled faintly, nodding to him like any partner whose contract I was about to terminate. With irrefutable evidence and the full backing of my family's finance team, the divorce moved faster than I expected. In just 3 weeks, the court granted my request. The marriage was deemed fraudulent from the start, nullifying most of the prenuptial agreements in my favor. Ryan was cut off from every asset, every investment, every trust fund he once bragged about to his friends. He even had the audacity to demand the sports car I had given him for his birthday last year. But Margaret simply played the audio recording of him telling Marissa he only married me for money. The final hearing was swift. No one pitied him. I signed the divorce agreement in Margaret's office, my hands steady, my heart no longer bleeding. When the pen touched the last page, I knew I had closed a chapter I would never allow anyone to rewrite. Ryan didn't even wait the 24 hours mandated by the court. He disappeared from our house that very night. I wasn't there to see him off. I went out for dinner with Loretta, enjoying my favorite steak. The first time in 3 years I didn't have to pretend to be happy. It wasn't about feeling triumphant, I just felt weightless. Ryan always thought he was the one writing the script for our marriage, but he forgot. His so-called money wife could just as easily write her own perfect ending. News of our divorce spread faster than I anticipated. Charleston is small enough for whispers to travel from ear to ear, and fake enough for people to act like they'd never heard a thing when running into each other at charity galas or garden parties. Ryan didn't just lose his financial privileges, he lost the image he had carefully built over 3 years. Those who once called him the perfect son-in-law turned their backs on him overnight. His friends avoided him, business partners kept their distance, and his own family sent me a half-hearted apology text once everything unraveled. I heard through the grapevine that Ryan had moved into a cheap rental apartment in North Charleston, a far cry from the lavish dinners and suffocating cocktail parties he used to thrive on. But he wasn't alone. Not long after, Loretta sent me a photo. Ryan hand in hand with a tacky blonde woman at a cheap bar near Littleton. Marissa, the same woman from those sickly sweet messages he sent while lying next to me. The one he promised a royal life once the plan was complete. I wasn't surprised, nor was I angry. I quietly saved the picture as a reminder that when someone used to leech off others loses their lifeline, they quickly look for a new target. A week later, I received an email from Marissa herself. Her tone was defiant, laced with arrogance. "Chloe, I know it must hurt to see Ryan finally happy with someone he truly loves, but you don't need to worry anymore. He chose me." I laughed. No rage, no bitterness. I replied with just one line. "Good luck, Marissa, you'll need it." I didn't need to explain, she would figure it out soon enough. What Ryan did to me, he would do to her. Men like him don't change. They only change their targets. As for me, I moved out of the house that was never truly a home just 2 weeks after the final hearing. I rented a small apartment by the river, where I could sit for hours on the balcony, watching the sunset ripple on the water with no one to interrupt me. I painted the walls in my favorite cream color, hung paintings Ryan used to mock as too girly. Those little things, which once seemed insignificant, made me feel, for the first time in years, that I was truly living for myself. The first few nights in my new place weren't easy. I didn't cry because I missed Ryan. I cried because I mourned the version of myself who once believed in a love that turned out to be a lie. But that pain didn't last. It made room for a kind of freedom, lighter than anything I had ever known. My parents, after dealing with their own heartbreak, slowly became more proactive in reconnecting. My dad would sit with me on late evenings, saying little, just sharing a beer and watching baseball like we did when I was a kid. My mom sent me links to articles titled things like, "Signs He's a Gold Digger." I only smiled politely but appreciated her heart was in the right place. Loretta became my inseparable companion. She dragged me to yoga classes, hiking trips, and cooking classes I had always been hesitant to try. I made mushroom risotto for the first time, and no one tried to take over the kitchen. I gradually reclaimed the pieces of myself I had lost in my marriage to Ryan. I laughed out loud in coffee shops without caring about the looks I got. I embraced quiet evenings alone with a glass of wine and an old jazz playlist Ryan used to mock. Ryan thought he would destroy me, but all he did was help me find myself again. A month later, I received an invitation to speak at a women's law conference in Atlanta on the topic of financial self-protection in marriage. I chuckled when I read the email. I figured maybe it was time to tell my story, but not with bitterness. Just the story of a woman who had once been seen as a walking wallet and learned how to lock that wallet, and her heart at the right place at the right time. My new apartment was on the 3rd floor of a small building near Charleston's historic district. It didn't have a big backyard, no luxurious living room like the house I once shared with Ryan. But from my bedroom window I could see the cobblestone street leading to the river. For me, that was enough. I chose the paint colors myself. Soft olive green for the living room, creamy yellow for the kitchen. No one interfered, no one commented that the color isn't good feng shui, like Ryan used to. I hung up my old college photos, moments I loved but had hidden away behind the lifeless art Ryan picked out. On my first night there, I opened my favorite bottle of wine, sank into my newly bought armchair and watched the golden light bounce off the ceiling. A small, quiet space, untouched by anyone, where no one told me to lower my voice or mold myself to please them. I spent time rediscovering things I had abandoned. I signed up for a pottery class every Wednesday night. Beneath the clumsy glaze and awkward shapes, I realized how long it had been since I let my hands create something I truly loved. I also started reading old books, things Ryan used to scoff at as a waste of time. On Sunday mornings, I rode my bike along the river, breathing in the salty ocean air. I smiled when I caught myself humming along to an old song playing in my earbuds, not even realizing it. For the first time in years, my laughter wasn't forced. After everything, my parents also became a stronger anchor than ever. Family dinners were no longer a stage for Ryan to brag or control the conversation. My dad grew quieter, but each time he patted my shoulder, his eyes said more than 100 words. My mom? She became an unexpected ally. She no longer sent me articles about spotting a gold digger, but instead recipes for the apple pie I loved most as a child. Loretta never left my side. She pulled me into endless coffee dates where we talked about everything but Ryan. We attended art exhibitions, outdoor indie concerts, the kind of things Ryan once sneered at as stuff for dreamers stuck in a fantasy world. Sometimes I still ran into old acquaintances of Ryan's around the city. They looked at me with a mix of pity and curiosity. I just smiled faintly, walking past them as if they were nothing but blurry shadows. Ryan used to be my entire world. Now, he was just an outdated name I no longer cared to mention. My life slowly filled with genuine connections. I learned how to say no to things that didn't make me happy. I realized sleeping alone wasn't as scary as I once thought. In fact, It became a time where I could listen to myself, healing invisible scars I had once pretended weren't there. One late night, I received another email from the Atlanta conference. They invited me to be a speaker for the panel on protecting women's financial rights in marriage. I spent a night thinking it over, then typed out my acceptance. Not because I wanted to relive the old story for sympathy, but because I wanted other women to know freedom doesn't come from anyone but yourself. Ryan had taught me the most expensive lesson of my life, and I knew I would never forget it. But I also wouldn't let the past hold me back anymore. The next morning, I brewed a cup of black coffee and stood on the balcony, watching the faint outlines of sailboats in the distance. I didn't need fancy dinners or expensive gifts. What I needed was peace. And I knew, this time, no one could take it away from me. I'm not sure when exactly I stopped thinking of Ryan as a wound. Maybe it was one spring afternoon when I was rearranging my small pots of plants on the balcony, my hands covered in dirt, yet my heart felt light. Or maybe it was that morning when I realized I had forgotten his birthday without a single pang of guilt. Truthfully, I didn't care anymore. I stopped looking for him in familiar corners of the city, stopped wondering what he was doing, where he was, or who he was with. The messages and photos Loretta occasionally sent me of him and Marissa, as a joke, now only made me scroll past indifferently. His life was now his own, no longer tangled up with mine. I spent more time focusing on myself. I signed up for a French class, something Ryan once mocked as silly who needs a dead language. I traveled alone for the first time in my life and realized I didn't need anyone else to fully appreciate the beauty of a foreign city. The people who once looked at me with pity now started looking at me differently, with curiosity and a bit of admiration. But I no longer cared about anyone's gaze. I didn't live to please others, nor did I live to prove anything to the past. My parents finally found their own peace too. Family dinners no longer revolved around Ryan or old stories. We talked about new projects, trips abroad, future plans that for the first time in years actually made me excited to think about. Loretta remained the best companion I could ask for. But now, she no longer checked my phone whenever a strange text popped up or secretly checked if Ryan showed up at social events. We had moved past those days, leaving behind the ghosts I had once let haunt me for far too long. One summer evening while I stood on the balcony, looking at the city lights glittering below, Loretta asked me if I thought I would ever love someone again. I just smiled, sipped my wine. If I do, I said, that person will have to learn to love the real me, not the version they can control. Loretta didn't reply. She just raised her glass and clinked it gently against mine under the soft golden light. I didn't need anyone to write me a fairy tale anymore. I had written my own story. And this time, I didn't need a prince to feel whole. I didn't need to say aloud that I was free. The way I lived, the way I breathed, the way I walked through familiar streets with new legs, that was answer enough. Perhaps the bitterest thing Ryan would never understand was this. The very things he saw as my weaknesses, my heart, my trust, were exactly what made me 100 times stronger than him. He once saw me as a walking wallet, a naive woman easy to manipulate. But I was no longer the Chloe he once knew. And I didn't need anyone to know that but me. In real life, Chloe's story isn't just a lesson about betrayal. It's a testament to the inner strength of a woman rising from the ashes. She chose not to drown in bitterness or blame, but to rebuild herself, step by step, with determination, courage, and self-respect. Chloe understood that true freedom doesn't come from someone else's love or validation, but from valuing yourself enough to live a life you choose. What do you think about Chloe's journey? How would you act if you were in her shoes? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to follow the channel to catch more heartfelt stories about family life.